the big thing to be cautious of, at least on like maybe an information side or a news side, is I really encourage people to like sort of audit who you're following and ask why. Because Gerard would argue that's a mimetic desire on your part. So then when you are having that mimetic desire to imitate this person, you then ultimately cultivate their desires and they become rooted in your own calling and your own community and what you bring to it. So it's just being very conscious and aware of who we're following because, I mean, there's more scriptural backing on that. In some way, you're going to be influenced by who you're surrounding yourself with, even if that's through a screen, right?
Welcome, everybody, to The Body Aesthetic. My name is Matthew. Today in the virtual studio, I have with us Seth Hawkins. Seth here has a YouTube channel where he analyzes film and books from a biblical Christian perspective. His channel is linked below. He does video essays breaking down film and does book reviews. Personally, I'm a fan, Seth, of your video essays. One of my favorite videos of yours is Industrialization is Spiritual Warfare. I thought that was a great subject and great title. So actually Seth here and I connected because my spiritual analysis of Del Toro's Frankenstein came up in his feed. He commented on it and I checked out his channel and really instantly fell in love with his content and subbed. So I encourage you guys to check it out and support him and subscribe to his channel. Since I have Seth with us here today, we're going to be discussing modern film as essentially a cultural symptom of what's going on in the modern world, spiritually speaking. I get the sense, Seth, that you're a little more well-read and learned than I am. I'm kind of more of a brute than a scholar, but I've always been a noticer, and even since I was a young lad, I've always noticed things in not just film, but media at large, so news or radio or whatever, even books. I've always been sensitive to messaging. And, people have different, definitions of what art is. But in my opinion, I think a big part of what defines art is the intent behind its creation. And so with an intent with a creator intent, that means there usually is a message associated with it or something that's being portrayed. In the modern world, we see that a lot, right? Especially we're seeing it from the woke perspective, right? That messaging is becoming a little more overt, a little less subtle. But there's subtle movements in a more of a foundational philosophical perspective in terms of cultural media. For example, like nihilism, subversion, deconstructivism, all that is kind of popping up in cultural media in a way that's leaving all of us with like a sense of or like a lack of meaning, right? So there's almost an intentional lack of intent, right? That's being portrayed in film. So I want to start discussing, starting with the whole deconstructivism as a philosophy. Maybe you can define that term for us and we can start talking about how that is being pervasively exposed in film and media.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a very likewise introduction for me to you once I found that Frankenstein video, and then I'm clicking around, see metaphysics of Star Wars and so on and so forth, and I was like, I think I found some kin here. So thank you for having me on, and yeah, I've been looking forward to having this talk. And you're right on about a lot of what you just outlined. I mean, especially I think it's interesting in the last few years as things get, I think, less and less subtle. Some of that has to do with just how we're actually engaging with media. We can blame phones and so forth, that I think people are adapting their messaging to be more overt, more clickbaity, more in your face because of what we're becoming accustomed to, how we take in information. So there's an interesting thing, and I hope moving forward with my channel, it's something I'm kind of changing, trying to get more into media theory and sharing that with others, especially from a spiritual perspective, where that news and information media that you were mentioning earlier is starting to have this very strange overlap with our fictional storytelling and the guiding myths that we construct and share with one another. And yeah, I think a big defining, what I'll say, critical mode that you see seeping into a lot of that is deconstruction, which throughout my undergrad and grad school experience was definitely something that in the English department was being put on us and kind of being hearkened even to this day, even though
Mm.
you can trace this back to roughly the 60s. And namely, your poster boy there is Jacques Derrida. And so for a deconstructionist, which kind of falls under this huge umbrella of postmodern thought, what that is sort of this critical mode or lens that sort of works to systematically take down or kind of destabilize meaning or any kind of stable identity or moral sensitivity, um, because it's ultimately working to sort of undercut whatever text is put in front of it. And that's because for people like Derrida, an idea was never fixed in the first place. There was this idea that every text refers to these other texts, and there's this entire web. And so you can't garner a stable truth claim because everything's so unstable, which ultimately leads to sort of this idea that, well, if that's the case, then why isn't just everything subjective to some degree? And then I think that you can kind of clearly see in both our fiction and nonfiction the end goal of that is to ultimately push and show and interrogate whatever authority structure you can kind of point to, whether that's the text itself or authority figures and institutions that that text may be tied to or work with. Um, and I mean, clearly, I feel like the spiritual danger in that sort of mindset is apparent there. I mean, you and I would point to objective undercurrents in our world, even if we experience them subjective to some degree. There is an objective reality even beyond ours, that we know to be the triune God, Yahweh, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, that's ultimately what brings this creation
Mm.
together. So without relying on that, it becomes this very whirlwind kind of experience. And as you said, I think it very easily opens the door for a sense of hopelessness, a lack of meaning, and to not have stable footing. I think
Mm.
to give a good example and something I've been musing over with something like that is really how that is apparent in a lot of like explainer videos, or I think that's the best way to describe it in the space, where you might have like an expose piece or something like that that someone wants to put out there. And typically the end goal of that is to be suspect of kind of anything in authority from the get-go and pick it apart. And usually you can easily do that. And that's not even to say that there couldn't be very valid criticisms going on, that certain things shouldn't be brought to the light. But I feel like the takeaway for us on a spiritual level there is to practice sort of discerning the media itself. And we're probably going to use the term discerning a lot in this talk. But ultimately, it's sort of like if you're finding a piece that is deconstructing something, you should then ask, what is it then reconstructing toward? And in my experience as of late, I feel like I'm seeing more and more things that the answer is kind of nothing. And so then
Right.
there's this interesting gap where I use this term on my channel a lot. There's just sort of then this like manufactured nihilism that gets baked into that piece. And it, it's to the gain and profit of whoever's putting that out there, because now you have this gap, and whoever those explainer video companies can be. I feel like a classic example of that would be someone like Vice. They kind of hearkened it, even though now it's a lot more decentralized and you just kind of have it all over the place.
Mm.
Um, that's good for your anxiety and your fear to then be fed into them continuously deconstructing all these things you previously trusted, you know?
Yeah, it's also it's just a lot easier to destroy than it is to create, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So everyone's happy to do the destroying, but then it's like, oh, what's left? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a void,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, we know as Christians, obviously, that the spirit behind all of this stuff is Satan and his minions, right? The
Hmm.
satanic powers and evil powers. Um, so we know that there is a conscious being behind it all. Let's say, even if the agents of that conscious being are knowingly or unknowingly participating in it and doing it in a conscious way, right?
Mhm.
They may be just, deconstructing because you know, it seems like they're actually doing something. Oh, like I'm pointing
Mhm.
out the flaws of, order and stability and, traditional culture and whatever. But like we said, they're not doing anything to, let's say, fix the things that they're pointing out or offer any kind of alternative solutions. So yeah, I mean, I look at my baby boy, and you know, as a baby, he's not able to really create anything, right?
Mhm.
But if I stack a bunch of blocks in front of him, immediately he wants to go knock it over, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I hate to compare people to children, but uh, at large, I get the sense that we're a lot more irrationally driven and
Mhm.
emotionally driven, like children. Um, and I don't know if it's any more or less than any other point in history, but um, we, w- in relation to that, like we said, we're going to say discernment a lot in this episode. So children lack that discernment, and when you're in a state of irrationality, you don't have. In Orthodoxy, the saints refer to it as the nous, which is like
Mhm.
the logos, of your intellect, where you're able to. That's kind of where discernment resides, right? It's like it's a form of rationality, but it's goes beyond just the physical. It's like a metaphysical, spiritual sense.
Mhm.
Um, and so I think a big part of the push of cultural media with Satan behind it is to eradicate and suppress that nous, that spiritual discernment and that understanding, and keep us in uh, a place of irrational operation where we're easily dominated by our passions, our
Mhm.
our passions of lust and greed and gluttony uh, and you see that. Oh, sorry, I smashed my mic. You see that ever present in everything in modern life, not just media, or not just movies, but advertisements and
Yeah. Yeah.
billboards and everywhere you go. It's some appeal to the passions, right? To either
Mhm.
get you to consume, spend, do something. And in let's say cultural media where there's intent to convince you of something or to propose a viewpoint, it's trying to sell a viewpoint, right? It's trying to sell
Yeah. Yeah.
um, a way to uh, move you down, let's say, a not so great spiritual path, as we've been seeing, in recent years.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's something that I feel like I need to harken even more on my channel is that I think there's sometimes an assumption people have that, well, it's not everything is trying to sell me on something or have a message all the time, but it's just not the case at all, right? It's like if someone, as we've outlined already, if they have an intent to create something, the act of that creation itself is in fact messaging something to you. Um, and I mean, I think like one of my favorite examples when that shows up, and I think someone can kind of be dismissive of just, you know, if something's even just like mindless entertainment, well, the mindless entertainment in of itself is the message, and it's a slippery slope when you especially use something like mindless. But a really good example of that was just like when the impressionist painters start up, there's like this huge uproar, and it's just about like how they're presenting something like a landscape versus the traditional forms. And it's like to us now and the kind of media we consume, the idea that you could have this moral panic and uproar and debate around landscape painting, that was like a huge deal at the time, I feel like shows really how deep this messaging actually can be. We're just, I think, a lot of times so disconnected from it in that way. And so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to kind of encourage that very conscious consumption if you're depending on what level of media engagement you decide to have. That's ultimately the thing. It's like, how can we empower each other to do that?
Yeah. Yeah, and even to go back to scripture, Christ says that, if like the eye, I can't remember the exact quote, but it talks about the eye as being a measure of a person's soul. So like if the eye is
Mhm.
light, then light is capable of being within you. If your eye is darkness, and there's darkness within you, and that's on one level that's has to do with what we expose ourselves, visually, and there's no such thing as, let's say, um, any kind of visual media, picture, movies, whatever, that has zero impact on us.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
that just doesn't exist. Like every kind of stimulus, we encounter has a non-zero impact on our biology, on our psyche, in some level. So like you said, mindless entertainment, like it doesn't have a non-zero impact on us. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
even for what it is. So let's talk about subversion, because that's that's like every modern creative's like kind of number one, like, let's say, creative tactic, even though I don't think it's creative, because
Mhm.
it's like a cheap way of being like, oh, I'm different because I'm going to take what you expect and I'm going to do the opposite. And it's like, that doesn't take creativity. But okay.
Yeah, yeah.
And like, obviously the best example of that, in recent years would be Game of Thrones, right? Subverting
Mhm.
expectations was, kind of the cornerstone of Game of Thrones. And I would say Game of Thrones was, a series that did it in a, I don't necessarily say meaningful way, because I do think that show's very evil, and does uh, uh, does express a lot of evil things that, like, even to the point where I was watching it and I was binging it, I could felt the spiritual depression come over me.
Mhm.
Um, but they did it at the kind of the show specifically, at a right place at a right time, where um, it had a huge cultural impact.
Mhm.
And it was great, technically speaking. It was great film. It was great drama. Um, and so it's kind of the world uh, went fully down that path where it's like now everything has to be subversive. Everything has to subvert the audience's expectations to the point where now it's just the norm. And it's like, at what point does subversion not become subversion? Like now it's
Yeah.
subversive to be traditional.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I'd love to hear your take on, like, how subversion, I guess, like, what is its cultural impact, if any, and where do you think film is going to go from here, now that kind of we're all jaded on the subverting thing?
Yeah, yeah, I think we can take subversion even further than, like, purely our expectations, and you can sort of think about what is the spiritual underpinning of that, because what the subversion also relies on is inverting in some way, inherited symbols or story patterns or ideas, and then it doesn't just try to, like, hollow them out all the time, right? It tries to replace them, in some way. It challenges them to a degree, even if it doesn't do so in, like, a loud way. It could be kind of unspoken. Um, we can, like, think of this, there's been this, like, strange thing in the world of advertising where there's this interplay of, like, a lot of religious imagery and, like, conspiracy theory imagery and advertisement right now, because in some way when they're subverting that and they're inverting it in some way, it's shocking and it gets a lot of attention, which is what the ads want, and then they can do this second thing. Balenciaga was a huge scandal, like, a year or so ago doing that, and there's every fast food chain, I've seen quite a few lately that wanna play into, like, this conspiracy, Illuminati, weird, like, occultist, like, mindset, like, imagery in their pieces because it gets people talking about it. Um and again, it comes down to sort of an awareness of you seeing that, picking up on it, asking, what is being subverted and who's gaining what by doing that with the advertisements. I think that's pretty clear, right? Um, but then when you get into like something deeper when it comes to things like storytelling, like Game of Thrones, which I can't speak super well to. I hadn't watched it. I read the first book long ago. And so I get an understanding of like how it was being subversive, especially with, it's spoilers for whoever, but like they kill off, who you think is the main guy, like pretty
Right.
quick within the first book. And it's like this whole world's built around him and then he's killed. Um, but I think we're seeing it a lot again and again. I think the way we connected was something like Frankenstein. Del Toro was working to subvert a lot of things in that. You see this a lot right now, actually, with classic book adaptations. And
Hmm.
it's funny, it gets
My
back into
wife
like
is
sort of
very
the,
upset about this.
yeah, I mean, it's the same with me, right? I mean, it's like, I didn't see the new Wuthering Heights, but it, to my understanding, was doing the exact same thing.
Right.
The most recent Animal Farm adaptation is like this, like laughing stock because it not only had like apparently like brain rot humor in it, but like completely did away with what Animal Farm was about. Instead of making about the rise of communism, let's try to make it about capitalism, even though like what that story's doing doesn't work with whatever criticisms of like capitalism you're trying to suppose. But
It's
and then
almost like communism won, and it's
yeah,
now the
it's like
cultural
that.
mainstream.
Yeah, and then I think the other really big one that comes to mind is Rings of Power and what Amazon was attempting to do with that, with Tolkien's world, and subverting what people are accustomed to with the motifs and symbols that he was using in that world. Um, and I mean, ultimately, it's the weird spiritual tug beneath it is that subversion is trying to use things that we might say are good, true, and beautiful, all the way to sacred things, and working against it by taking what those symbols can mean, but stripping them of the power for someone's own gain at the end of the day, right?
Mm.
Um, and for me, I feel like this is sort of an interesting takeaway when I was musing over this, but I was reminded of like C.S. Lewis. I think he actually writes this in a introduction to Boethius or something, where he's like, to combat like subversive elements, because he was even seeing that in his day. It's like you should just read like the original. You should get back to primary sources. You should dig deeper into what these things are. If I see a repeat of a certain symbol, I might ask, what is that symbol? Where does it come from? Let me go down a rabbit trail. And especially at this point now, getting information like that is pretty easy, online. But, read or watch the source material, so you can feel the subversion that's going on rather than kind of being carried by it unknowingly. That's sort of ultimately the interplay that I see of subversion. And yeah, I mean, to a point you raised earlier, I mean, during my academic time, like it was sort of applauded if someone acted in subverting or inverting these things in this way, because of the same things we outlined when we were just talking about deconstruction. It's here's this established authority thing. Because of how we bring deconstruction to the picture, we can kind of say it's invalid. So then why not subvert everything involving with it? And then we have this very strange, like, oh, this person can be kind of an artistic hero because they broke this thing down and they subvert it, and they're guiding us into some sort of new progressive direction with this thing, even though many times doing such really just is more regressive than anything.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So C.S. Lewis talking about going to the primary sources, I think is interesting because that's like when he talked about that philosopher earlier about how everything is a web and everything's kind of relation has a relation to something else.
Mhm,
Um, that's because a lot of these modern philosophies are reactive, right? They're
mhm,
reactions to something, and then you have reactions to the reactions, and then reactions to the reactions to the reactions, and so it does seem like it's kind of just this web of something is related to another, but um, to think that's only it is to deny that there's an origin point,
mhm,
right? And
yeah,
an origin requires creation.
mhm,
So Obviously, we understand that in a deep level with as Christians, because God is the creator. He's the point of origin of all things. Um, and so that's how we know that there's objective truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because there's an origin point. Um, subversion. Okay, so subversion has a relationship with, and I think deconstruction has a relationship with nihilism, which
Mm-hmm.
is kind of the ever present, permeating underlying philosophy of like everything in the modern world, like everything we consume, the way people behave, like societal expectations, cultural behaviors. A lot of it is underpinned by nihilism.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's a huge topic, right? We could talk for tens of
Yeah.
hours on it. But there's obviously like a lack of meaning in the world today, and a lot of it, obviously, we know has to do with rejection of the old Christian world, which
Mm-hmm.
uh, you know, God is the source of values, a source of virtues, a source of all goodness and love, and so a rejection of God is to basically embrace this nihilistic world, and is to embrace a lack of meaning. But that lack of meaning leaves us depressed, leaves us
Mm-hmm.
lonely, leaves us unfulfilled, uh, aimlessly, you know, floating in the void. And last year, when my wife was pregnant, we were we were watching a lot of movies because she wasn't very mobile and there's not much else to
Yeah.
do.
That's what you do.
Yeah, and there were a couple of movies that we watched that were pretty new at the time, and we watched them back to back. And I thought they were interesting movies. Well, I can't remember the names of one. One was about like a chef, like some kind of avant-garde famous chef, and he invites like 10 or 20 like famous people to
The
his
menu. Is
the
that one?
menu. Yes,
Yeah. That's it. Yeah.
there was that one, and then right after that, we watched another movie with Jesse Heisenberg, I think his name is,
Mm-hmm.
the Facebook guy, and that was a movie where him and his wife like buy this house in this
Yeah.
suburb, but it's like you know what I'm talking about?
Vivarium, I believe is that one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. So we watched these two movies like back to back. And I thought they were decent movies in a technical sense, and I thought they
Mm-hmm.
explored interesting ideas. But at the end of both of them, you're like, okay, what was the point of that? Like, what did I just
Mm-hmm.
watch? Like, there was no real message. There was no real, um, um, there's nothing. Like, it was just kind of like events happened and then the movie ends. There's no conclusion to anything. There's nothing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I just remember um, being like, this is the symptom of nihilism. It's like these movies like literally had no meaning. Like they had plots, they had characters, they had events, but there was quite like no point to them whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
And they had messages in the sense that it's like, oh, we're critiquing this and that, and we're pointing out this, or we're exploring interesting ideas. Like with Vivarium, I thought it was an interesting idea. I don't want to spoil anything, but um, uh, okay, I'm gonna spoil a little bit. It has to do with aliens, and like I love alien movies, and me and my brother love that kind of stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
I had an interesting idea with aliens, but then it doesn't tell you anything about what's happening. It's just
Mm-hmm.
the movie ends in a dark way, and then that's it. I think, and again, this goes back to Satan being the kind of the mind behind it all. I think there's a large push to essentially demoralize us on
Mm-hmm.
a wide scale, and I think it's being done in a large part through this nihilistic messaging. And this is like in video games, it's in movies, it's in scrolling on Instagram. It's everything that you
Mm-hmm.
consume is like seemingly designed in a way to demoralize you. I want to explore like why, like what is the intention? Why is nihilism so pervasive, and why is it attempting to demoralize us uh, to the extent that um, its aims are for something, right? So
Yeah.
let's explore that and see what we can come up with.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're spot on with saying it is sort of the prevailing philosophy of a lot of our culture in the last, at least 50 years, if not beyond that. I feel like basically anything post-atomic bomb, sort of starts to kind of take this on. You see an ebb and flow with a lot of things, but it sort of keeps progressing to this point. To a point now where, recent video I did, you're seeing some people try to push against it, even if they're not, Christian, which leads to some really interesting, cultural products and output and what the messaging is and those things and how they're dealing with it. But um and just for anyone that doesn't know, I mean, when we're using the term nihilism, I throw out this phrase all the time. It's just like a $10 word for like essentially I would say just hopelessness, because that's sort of something at the core of it. But it's something that eggheads use and philosophers use because it sort of makes the presentation of life doesn't inherently have a meaning. It doesn't inherently even have a moral order or like a telos that we might say. Um, so instead, it opens this gap where it's sort of up to you to create those new values. It's up to you to figure out what to do with like this inevitable crisis of culture. At least that's what the godfather of all of it, Friedrich Nietzsche, would argue for. That's his will to power.
Mm,
That's sort of what he is pushing for. But what you more so get with that is what we're describing, where there's just a gap, and that gap is hopelessness. And it often gets sort of passed off to us as sort of this more purely kind of like aesthetic thing where it's like, oh, well, this is very sophisticated, this is really real. This is just how it is, like buck up and like kind of deal with this because that's just the reality of the world. Um, at least that's how it's presented over time to us, and that's something I outline in that video where it's like for me growing up, and I'm sure it's the same for you. It's like every big art house sort of piece or every like elevated movie that everyone loved, that was sort of what it pushed for. Um, and at the end, it's like what is to be gained by having these constant stories that work to the two that you outlined here, I think are good examples, good recent ones, because they are doing the first two things we talked about. They're deconstructing something. The menu is sort of this very consumerist culture. It's all vapid, and like we're taking away something as foundational as like eating food together, and we're commodifying it and making it this, elitist thing. That's like part of its criticism. With Vivarium, a big part of that, from what I recall watching it, was sort of taking apart like, here's your suburban life, and it's like blasé, and it's like bland and dumb, and you're like becoming a robot because you live this like kind of life, and then it goes into different directions, but it's foundationally kind of playing with that. So it's like, okay, there's like these things that it wants to critique and deconstruct. Then both of them have this subversive element. With the menu, it's like, I'm going to kill all these people. The vivarium, the aliens come into play. Um, but like we've been encouraging, when you discern what is it trying to reconstruct toward? And from what I recall with both of those, it just kind of burns everything down, like literally in one case, and like that's it. And there's really nothing there to open it to. And so, as I said earlier, that opens this gap when you don't give something to reconstruct, that a manufactured nihilism can come into play, and it does demoralize. And it's interesting because there's sort of a cycle or web that I feel like we can keep noticing when people do this. Because first and foremost, there are a lot of people in this space. Like I was kind of wanting to hint at this with the subversion thing a bit, where it's like a lot of these people genuinely think they're doing something, like, and they're doing something well. They're not going into this with like the intent to demoralize. They're coming in it with a different intent, but we know that the end goal can ultimately be that. And there certainly are some people that actually do have the intent to demoralize you and to instill that in us. we've known this for a long time with news media, for example. If you fearmonger, if you bring the doom and gloom, people get freaked out, they get anxious, they get fearful. They're going to stay glued to the screen because you're this authority giving them that information, and we just kind of feed off of it. We can easily sink into that hole. So at the end, like, for one thing, what's to be gained is, well, when these systems at play, these cultural products, and everyone that's profiting off of it can keep people fearful and anxious, when they can manufacture that nihilism, that sense of
Mm.
hopelessness, well, now I can kind of keep feeding you something here, and I'm going to keep making money, is kind of the ultimate concern. That's the ultimate concern of a lot of media theorists historically, is how ultimately this stuff just works to advertise, and it ultimately works to just keep you paying up something and locked in that cycle. Um, yeah, I mean, and I think,
I guess if you're satisfied and fulfilled, you're less likely to spend money.
yeah, I mean, I've heard anecdotes, but one from my father-in-law, who's been in e-commerce and everything for a long time, is he was at this huge conference, and they were talking about targeting different demographics, and literally the keynote speaker in the midst of it said, unless there's someone who is truly a Christian, you can't advertise to them. That's the one demographic we've never cracked. And
Hmm.
it's just because the
Hmm.
satisfaction, the fulfillment of it, right? Um,
Okay,
but yeah,
so
and
sorry,
at the core of it,
I don't want to
go
go
ahead,
to
yeah.
like a deep rabbit hole in another direction, but I think that's a really important point because I've talked about this with my friends, and because it's like, okay, why is there such a cultural push to deconstruct and attack Christianity? And I think at the heart of it, it's that because Christ offers us a path of freedom from sin, right? Freedom
Hmm.
from our passions. And um, if we're free in Christ, we are no longer a slave to the passions, as I mentioned, gluttony, lust, greed, avarice, those kinds
Hmm.
of things. Uh, those are methods of control in which, obviously Satan uses us to control us spiritually, but um, let's say evil people use also to control us, let's say socially, politically,
Hmm.
culturally, whatever. Um, so, like manipulating people through lust and controlling people through money and obviously bribery is like the simplest number one, let's say, form of corruption, right? So a Christian who's given themselves over to Christ is less likely to be influenced by those things, and so that's I think why Christians and Christianity specifically is targeted by the world.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I would completely agree with that. And like I said, and then that, like we said, there's a, I would say you just keep kind of cycling when it comes to sort of the nihilistic despair that occurs, which is why it's been so prolific over a certain amount of time, even up till now. I mean, it's easy to go and find a movie, a TV show, or something that still kind of posits that feeling, that worldview. Um, though we're seeing, as we're discussing here, enough people are recognizing that cycle, and they're thinking, well, what do we do with it now? Because clearly this sort of, even if we deconstruct everything, take it apart, and we kind of impose a nihilistic view on it, that there doesn't seem to be anything inherent here, so like, what do I do with it? Some people then go down one trail of saying, okay, well, maybe there is something inherent there, but that they don't always get to Jesus right away, and that opens the door to all kinds of, a lot of interesting things that we're seeing happen right now. Um, or something that I outline in that video was something like Everything Everywhere All at Once. It really tried to take on, it literally takes on like nihilism head on. Like the literal villain is like this black hole of nihilism that's going to consume and destroy everything, because of all these possibilities, it doesn't seem like anything has any inherent meaning, and they're channeling through it. But it offers a solution through love, but it doesn't name it as specifically as it could, right? it doesn't really get at Jesus or anything. It's sort of like, it's about family and love. But something I point out in there is like, even if you're presenting that thing in of itself, you're just presenting that, and you're not giving the entire structure underneath it that you and I know it to have. Um, so yeah, and I think just the encouragement for any believer kind of seeing all this is, one, I think it's really great to recognize because we can see where others are at. And then two, it's like have their own discernment to know if you're getting roped into it in some regard. Because I mean, if you're feeling despair, I mean, we're not called to feel that. I mean, with doom scrolling, if you constantly feel that doom, we're not called to feel that. Um, so just really kind of in tuning yourself and then finding avenues that I think can deal with those things in a serious manner, but they don't succumb to them, right? It's like there's a way to talk about something as devastating as war without just kind of ruminating on it and just falling into despair, you know?
Very well said. I want to make one note before we get into the next topic, but uh, I actually lost my train of thought about the nihilism thing. Wow. Yeah, I lost it. I'm sorry.
You
I'm
good?
this is what 3 hours of sleep a night with a 1-year-old baby gets you. But I thought that was, I haven't watched that video that you did about everything everywhere all at once, and I haven't seen the movie. But I thought it was an interesting topic about I think it's called cynicism is cringe or something like that. Is
Yeah, I
that
put a few different titles to kind of clickbait it. Yeah.
okay, yeah. Well, I think that's interesting because, like, back in the Fight Club era, like nihilism and cynicism was like cool and edgy, um, and this just kind of like realistic way to view the world, right? That's
Hmm.
you know is like we say disenchanted, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And okay, I just realized what I wanted to say before, so I want to go back. So forgive me for the
You're
scatterbrain.
good. You're good.
Um, so what you said about love being kind of the counter to nihilism and everything everywhere all at once, and then how like in Del Toro's Frankenstein, forgiveness, was kind of the message at the end. And I haven't seen it, but um, Spielberg's latest film, the Aliens, Disclosure
The
Day.
Disclosure Day.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
empathy is kind of like the message, right?
Mm.
That's because that's what the aliens are trying to say. Like, we need to be more empathetic. And I had a conversation with another guest that was on the show. He was a convert to Orthodoxy from a New Age spiritual background, and he said something that's fresh in my mind, which I just connected to what we're talking about today. And he was saying how for the New Ager, they're constantly chasing truth as a what.
Mm.
And that's kind of what these movies are doing. It's like, oh yeah, truth is love, right? But as a what? Truth is forgiveness
Mm.
as a what? Truth is empathy as a what? Rather than pursuing truth as a who, which we know is Jesus Christ. Who
Hmm.
who is the source of all those virtues, right? Um, and so that's like like you said, it's like the world is trying to combat nihilism and meaninglessness, but without God, right? Without the who, and it's through all these whats that ultimately aren't going to solve the problem. Um, okay, so yeah, that's what that's what I wanted to comment on before
No, that's good.
before I
That's
lost
really
my train
good.
of.
Yeah.
But going back to cynicism, um, now like okay, there's I don't know if you've seen him. He's another Orthodox content creator on YouTube. His name is Jonathan Peggio.
Yeah. Big
Are you
time.
familiar
Yeah.
with him? Okay, yeah. So
Yes. Yeah.
so his kind of mission is like re-enchantment, right? And we're kind of
Hmm.
starting to see some of that come back with people just being tired of the meaningless void of the modern world. Um, so how are we seeing that messaging shift from like cynicism being cool and edgy to now being cringe, and now it's like cool and counterculture to add meaning into the world?
Yeah, I mean, and I think what we're alluding to already is certainly the case where cynicism and disenchantment are kind of together. I think we might say that like cynicism is sort of the emotional register of disenchantment in that process. And when I throw out disenchantment, I think, and this certainly would be in the Pajot flavor of like we had so much of the scientific materialism, so much of the scientific reductionism, and sort of this enlightenment fueled worldview, very left brain heavy kind of stuff that it stripped everything that we could see as not even just supernatural, but I used that turn of phrase earlier, just true, good, and beautiful. I use that on my channel a lot, that we're stripping it of all those things. And instead, we're trying to often reduce things down to the most fundamental material part that we can do, right? Because at the end of the day, we could just look at the world and say, well, it's just a bunch of cells like organized and doing stuff together, and that's it. So like, what's the point of all of it? Um, and a lot of that's been just brought on by scientism as we're going through.
Mm,
But it's interesting to sort of see this shift occurring in on scale in the culture because and one thing you have people that are reassessing our relationship to nature, for example, which was greatly informed by more like industrialization thought in the past. And again, the big left brain just breaking nature down to these systems rather than seeing something like intelligent design behind it where it's so complicated. There's still mystery there to be had. And people are starting to lean back into it. Um, Something in my own experience, in the realm of something like music, I think people are starting to re-enchant music to a certain degree. We talked about how, yeah, it's, these sound frequencies and they do this and we can do that. You can hear people say phrases like, music's just basically math. And it's like, then I don't think you understand music if you think it's just basically math. Um, and I say that in my space because I work with a little website called Black Forge, and we cover underground black metal and dungeon synth.
Dungeon
And
synth. I think I've
and me
seen,
and
yeah, I've seen some of that on YouTube.
yeah, yeah. Every now and then an album kind of just takes off in the algo from that space. If it could fit in like an '80s fantasy movie, that's what dungeon synth is
Mm,
basically. But me and Andrew, who's now my friend, I just knew him as the editor in chief, and when I reached out to him with this little site he was running, because I was very into the Christian black metal scene, just listening to all these people, then I found this guy that was interviewing and like reviewing all their albums in that space. And you see this across music right now, and it's an idea I've been tinkering with for a video, is people are getting more and more into like ritualizing their music, even like live on stage. They're
mm-hmm,
getting more and more into embracing that there is some kind of spiritual dimension going on there. And with the dungeon synth scene, it's interesting. You find a lot of people that they get into the frequencies, and there's sort of a new agey element to it where it's like, I'll make this album where I kind of hit these certain registers for so long, and I think it can lead to like sort of a transcendent meditation.
mm,
um Same thing with black metal, where he and I have talked about it, and an end goal of it is we don't just write about the Christian artists in that space, but other people that are doing something more uplifting to the human spirit. As black metal historically, I mean, its origins were satanic bands, church burnings, murder, and then so anything downstream from that, it's sort of embraced in the past as being highly subversive. That was kind of its whole thing. Um, but there's still this interesting craving, as small of a scene as that is, for something mystic and something supernatural, but they won't always point to Jesus for it.
mm,
I think because of these wide, broad strokes that we've been discussing so far, where it situates Christianity in a particular camp, that reduces it to that ultimately. That's sort of the cynical mindset anyway. And so I'm not even going to go near that, but I'm very interested in sort of the occultic side of things. I'm sort of interested in the neo-pagan side of things. So that's part of the balancing act I'm seeing. And I mean, we've seen it even recently. I bring up black metal, but all the way to the most popular musicians, Taylor Swift, Lana Del Rey, whoever, they are tinkering with neo-pagan imagery and ideas on stage. So it's like it's great that the re-enchantment's coming, that the disenchantment has kind of hit its end, but I think where we're sitting at right now is okay, well, where can I find the culture and the cultural products that are re-enchanting in a truly constructive way? Because from my vantage point, I see like a scattershot. There's certainly an increased interest in Christianity, but then I'm seeing a lot of cultist, neo-pagan,
Mhm.
new age, that's all coming into play. And the alien thing's huge right now too, right? And that kind of tinkers with some of the new age stuff a lot. Um,
It's an interest in the
but yeah,
metaphysics
yeah,
and in metaphysics in general, basically, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It could be dangerous though, because like you said, it can go in dark ways because um, I'm my brother's a musician, he's a guitarist, and so I grew up listening to metal and stuff, and I remember there was this like neo pagan band that I used to be super into. I introduced my brother into. We were both big fans, and um, to tell the story, first of all, their name is Therian, which should have been a red flag there because Therian is the beast in Greek, and that's the beast of
Mm-hmm.
Revelation, right?
Yeah,
But their music was not nihilistic. I mean, it was very uplifting. Uh, it was very technically awesome. I mean, it was really good music. And but then on stage, they dress like Vikings or whatever and pagans, and
yeah,
it was like
yeah,
a band of like 15 people. Something like it was kind of interesting. And they would kind of do ritualistic stuff on stage or whatever. And when I was growing in my faith, I was like, I gotta stop listening to these guys. And I told my brother, like, we gotta stop listening to them. And he's like, no, they're just LARPing, like, they're it's not
yeah,
serious. It's like whatever, the music's fine. And then like a couple years later, like they released a new album that was literally like titled like Hail Daddy Satan, and like every track was like, Satan worship. And I
yeah.
was like, I said to my brother, I was like, told you so. Oh man. So yeah, there's slippery slopes there.
There are, yeah, and you bring up a point of something that I feel like top down when we get into talking about media and media analysis that it gets brought up when I talk about with people, but from a Christian vantage point, we have a strength here to share this. It's, aren't you just like overanalyzing, or is it really that serious? It's sort of something that shows up, but it's like to the point of like saying, well, someone's just LARPing, or like maybe they don't know what this symbol means. I feel like recently in real music, this happened with Doja Cat, who would have like these pentagrams and everything everywhere. And she's like, well, I don't know what it is. I just think it looks cool. And it's like, well, at the end of the day, it's like that symbol has more power than like what we're trying to intent onto it. We know there's a spiritual undercurrent. So it's like, even if we see something that an artist intends or doesn't intend, because we're coming at it from this Christian perspective, there's a greater truth around all of this. There's supernatural things going around all of this that it's like, hey, I can read into that, and it's not necessarily over analyzing in that
Hmm.
way. So that's just something I sometimes like encourage people when they're getting in that mindset of like, well, like, do I really need to like analyze this that deeply, and so on and so forth.
Mhm. Yeah, cool. There was a point you wanted to talk about the disembodied self. Um, so in the 2026, like we've been warning about transhumanism for many years, like as Christians,
Mm-hmm.
and the world just keeps seeing the like barrel down towards it. And
Mm-hmm.
part of the rise of transhumanism is like the return of Gnosticism. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and for those that don't know, Gnosticism, I mean, it's a Christian heresy that's existed since the beginning. And to put it simply in layman's terms, it's like, I don't know, a bunch of people mashed like Christian ideas with pagan ideas and wrote fan fiction, and that's what Gnosticism turned out to be. But a big element of Gnostic belief is that the world, the created world, the physical world, is not inherently good. It's actually inherently evil, right? Which is opposite of what the gospel says. In Genesis, God created heavens and the earth, and it was good. Um, and that the real world, the good world, is the world of the spirit, the world of the idea, and we're like good spirits trapped in an evil vessel, and so we need to transcend our physical vessels and return to the good world of spirits. Um, so we're seeing this messaging kind of pop up as we get closer and closer to a the technological reality of being able to interface biology with machine, and um, let's say like even mimic consciousness or map consciousness to a server or to
Hmm.
to tech. Elon Musk is creating literally chips to put in your brain, right?
Yep. Yeah.
And combined with the rise of AI, as I mentioned in the Frankenstein video, I mean, AI has capabilities to track human movement using Wi-Fi, and like, so all this kind of
Hmm.
crazy like Skynet, like Terminator stuff is we're just barreling towards it. Um, why do you think the world is so attracted to transhumanism? Like, why is Gnosticism making such a return in the modern psyche? I'm interested to hear your take on that.
Yeah, I think, as with everything we've talked about, it's multifaceted and it can kind of be complicated. Um, but really, it's building upon a lot of the stuff we've been talking about. Um, with all the deconstruction, with sort of the nihilistic purview being pushed forward. Like we said, this gap can happen if nothing is reconstructed in its place, right? So, what Gnosticism posits, and usually when I'm using that now, it's sort of the broad sense of just like you said. There's something about this existence that seems wrong. The world is bad. Um, Another big part of that is that like my body is bad, like I am confined to it, and there's clearly some other like path out of this. Um, some of that is because I think everything we've talked about leading up to this that leads that gap is so focused on the corruption, the sin, the evil, that, well, to completely almost remove myself from that in some way is very attractive. Um, Rather than it being, well, I know that Jesus meets us in that, and I know that he embodied man himself in order to show us how we can, through spiritual practice, like really live out the intent that Yahweh has for his creation, including our bodies and his created world. Um, so I think there's something just attractive about like all the overflow of nihilism and the evils that you get bombarded with. Well, if I could just upload my consciousness on a server and everything's perfectly optimized and great, then like there's something attractive about it. Um, and then there's another part of that we were mentioning when it comes to sort of the disenchantment and the cynicism, that it's sometimes I feel like someone approaches things in sort of a Gnostic way, that they think, again, like you brought up, they're pursuing truth in some way. It's like, okay, there is something beyond all of this. I'm still accepting that this is all bad and evil. The beyond thing has to be something better. Um, so why don't I pursue that? Um, and I think, I mean, I feel like the big touch point thing that influences a lot of that is the Matrix. Like it just has to be, right? I mean, that sort of kicked off our modern conception of what that is, right? You know, you hear everything's a simulation, this world's a simulation stuff a lot still right now, just as like a common parlance. I mean, at least with the Matrix, there was a notion that like Neo and this group, they are like pursuing truth and they have like some way that they're going to try to combat this, even if it's bad on the other side, right? It's better to have that truth than to like live in the lie. Um, but even that only gets you so far to a certain degree, right? Um, but I think those things kind of have the opening of that, and then I think there's also we can talk about in a constructive way when it comes to things that act as like a warning with it. And actually, I think the movie Her does a really good job with that, where
Mm.
it already, and I mean, we're literally seeing that in the world now, where people are having these AI psychosis incidents that like this integration with this technology is influencing them so much that they're falling in love with it and so on and so forth. But at least in that movie, at the end, it's shown as insufficient and it sort of tears down everything in this guy's life. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's at the end of the day, the way that we see it is that God took on a body, God stepped into this physical realm of existence, and he made it so it can be good. So the resurrection of the body is not this pure escapism that Gnosticism would push for, but rather it's the actual glorification and the proper ordering of what Jesus
Mm.
is calling us into. Um, yeah, I think that's sort of why the Gnosticism's taking off, and even by name. I mean, when we were talking about the New Age and neo-pagan, I mean, go online, you can find plenty of people that are like earnestly into Gnosticism and believe this to be a good alternative to the disenchanted world that we were previously in.
I think that was a great point to bring up the incarnation because
Yeah.
transhumanism is almost like a disincarnation, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and you know, I was thinking as you were talking too, like even just kind of the way we exist and interact with the world uh, in a modern way is very disembodied.
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
you know, I work a desk job and I'm on a computer, you know, 10 to 12 hours a day for work. And then I'm playing video games on my computer, you know, in my spare time or whatever. So it's like the majority of the time I'm in a mode where I'm not physically engaged. I'm up here in the
Yeah,
world of
yeah,
my head. Right. And so even just the way we exist in the modern world is disembodied. And
yeah.
my channel, The Body Ascetic, asceticism has uh, um, it's an important fundamental part of Christianity, and
Mhm.
the church has always engaged in ascetic practices, embodied practices, as a means to worship God. Right.
Mhm.
So fasting. Right. Jesus himself fast, um, prostrating, bowing. That's all demonstrated in the Bible. Physically using your body to sacrifice and
Mhm.
worship God. The sacrifices to God are a broken and contrite heart, right? Like that,
Yep,
like
yeah.
so. Um, so Gnosticism and transhumanism is like literally the complete opposite, right? It's disembodying ourselves and disconnecting us in a way that it's almost like we can't fully worship God when we're disconnected in that way. So
Mhm.
that's really interesting.
Yeah, yeah.
Take
And I
us,
think, if there's one last caveat on
yeah,
that point, this is sort of a fun motif that I think we can encourage discernment with is any media, any movie, TV show that's really trying to make you like a robot and humanize them a lot, I'd question it, right? You know?
or I mean, I don't know, I won't say that, but yeah, I completely agree. I mean, there's a lot of humanization of non-human
There is.
entities.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, in the last especially, like, 8 years, I feel like I just keep seeing it, you know?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. Uh, Tell me about mimetic theory and media idols because I'm not really educated in that kind of stuff, and I think it fits into everything we've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I threw this one out there as we were kind of thinking of connecting over this. I'm not as well read on Rene Girard as many other people you can find online and the likes, but Rene Girard, interestingly, was a philosopher and theologian at the same time that postmodernism was kind of becoming the standard of how people were going to start thinking and the downstream effects of that, right? But with mimetic theory, what he argues for is that human desire is ultimately imitative in some way. So what we want, what other people want in the end, and we're kind of overpowered by that. And then his concern with that is that global media exacerbates that into this giant, like, mimetic machine.
Mm,
It manufactures desire, as well as scapegoating. The scapegoat mechanism was another big part of this theory of his at, like, an industrial scale. And real brief on the scapegoat mechanism, once you see this, you can't, unsee it. So, um, there's an idea that when mimetic rivals, when these desires start to conflict and clash, that different communities will then discharge a call to violence or a call to ostracize onto a specific victim. Um, this is, of course, a big thing that was brought up with something like cancel culture, social media pileups, and, like, really just outrage cycles in a general sense. They're always playing into this, and then they made it part of the algorithm. So it's like you're kind of constantly seeing this scapegoat mechanism happen.
mm,
And ultimately, what Gerard kind of argues is that the gospel, what Jesus does for us with his salvation, it dismantles that scapegoat mechanism because he's pulling that all the way from the Old Testament. The scapegoat was a sacrifice that was sent off into the wilderness, um, to carry the sins of the Hebrew people. Um, and that ultimately the resurrection kind of vindicates all innocent victims that are having this scapegoating kind of put upon them. But a global media machine, by contrast, is kind of constantly trying to redo that again and again and again. Um, so I think the big thing to be cautious of, at least on, like, maybe an information side or a news side, is I really encourage people to, like, sort of audit who you're following and ask why. Ask, like, what are you being drawn to about this media personality and what they're doing? Is it something good? Do I want to be like them? Um, because Gerard would argue that's a mimetic desire on your part. So then when you are having that mimetic desire to imitate this person, you then ultimately cultivate their desires and they become rooted in your own calling and your own community and what you bring to it. So it's just being very conscious and aware of who we're following because, I mean, there's more scriptural backing on that. In some way, you're going to be influenced by who you're surrounding yourself with, even if that's through a screen, right?
yeah, totally. And I guess obviously you can apply that to um, beyond just like influencers, but like
Mhm.
cultural media at large, right? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Another thing you wanted to talk about is the pornographic gaze, right? And that's the male and the female gaze as a concept where like um, I'm assuming most of my viewership is male, so they understand the male gaze as like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
showing pretty women in media or whatever, and kind of only putting them in there specifically so that men can you know ogle. Um, and that's I don't know much about that in terms of like how that's been portrayed historically in media, but uh, you could see the feminist reaction to that. Um, and in this attempt to make things less beautiful and less appealing to the male gaze, right, as a means to
Mhm,
subvert and combat the um, historicity around that. Obviously, you're saying pornographic gaze because there's also a female equivalent to this, right? So this isn't just a male
mhm.
phenomenon. Um, let's talk about some of the theories that are centered around the male and female gaze.
Yeah. So, male gaze theory, which is sort of the more foundational part of this, comes from someone named Laura Mulvey, who argued that the way that cinema worked, in particular, the visual medium, worked to often objectify women. And at her time, mid 70s, this was because you still have a very male dominated space in Hollywood. It's mainly men that are producing these things. So when the women characters are placed there, they're literally shot, lighted, edited, depicted in ways that objectify them. Um, that's fairly easy to see, especially like you said with your own viewership. And I mean, the popular saying is that sex sells. So if they do that in advertisement, you're going to see it there. Same thing in movies. Um, But over time, there's been a development too of understanding a female gaze, which argues the same thing, but vice versa. And I think part of the reaction, in addition to what you shared, is that the female gaze has become more and more rampant over the decades. Um, why is it that in like every superhero movie, the guy's going to show up like shirtless at some point? Like I remember like it was kind of taking off with something like Magic Mike. If you're aware of that movie, it's a bunch of A-listers who are men that look good, and they're going to be male strippers in the movie, and that's the whole movie. But I also remember when that was being discussed with the female gaze, thinking like, why is it that Thor and Captain America had to have some scene where they come out and they're like shirtless, and it's kind of lingers there for a bit. And then that just goes on to saying, okay, what's sort of desirable to a female gaze on these male characters? And I think you see that a lot more now than you used to. But I want to, this is an idea I'm tinkering with for a video, which is why I kind of want to share here, is I want to take it even further and say there's this pornographic gaze that sort of captures all of that, but also goes deeper with how those mediums are messaging those things. So this goes, what I want to argue is that we now start to adopt more and more what sort of the attentive architecture of pornography does, which it's, for one thing, it's very violent. And so I think you can kind of experience that in the editing of these people that go into, whether it's social media, movies, TV, or whatever. I think this is really spurred on by noticing more and more jump cuts to like graphic sex scenes in the midst of like a movie. I'm seeing that like more and
And
more. The most egregious one for me recently that my wife and I still bring up is, unbeknownst to that, like seeing Oppenheimer, and there's just a hard cut to that when you don't really expect it.
it happened in Game of
But then
Thrones a
as
lot too.
I would imagine so. I mean, you're seeing that more and more. So there's sort of that element of it where, but then it's also trying to work more and more toward novelty and spectacle and simulation towards people and their bodies. Um, so you're seeing that again and again, and that's what is ultimately at the core of what pornography is doing, and it's working to dehumanize and objectify in that way. And really, I think just it's so massive at this point that the whole attention economy online really feeds on that. And it can be in very apparent ways, but I think it can also be in these more subtle ways with just how is someone positioning themselves in a video? How is someone editing themselves in that video? Or, if a team's doing it. So really, I think a way to get away from this is, one, media fasting is a really great thing to do.
Mm.
If you step away from media for a month and you come back, you're going to be seeing a lot of this. Just the fact of how someone's presented will start to click in your mind a lot. And the other thing I think you can do is to take more contemplative sort of media practices, looking at paintings, reading a book, or finding a movie that is more drawn out, more slow, that kind of goes against the mechanisms that work to make pornography what it is outside of the acts that it's depicting. Um, yeah, and I think a big director that I encourage when you want to. There's two I'll give. Actually, I'll stick to the one for now. But Terrence Malick, I think, sort of coined this, and he's kind of an art house director. But I mean, when you watch his movies, you are just thrust into these long, long shots that linger with this like beautiful natural light. They're very meditative. Sometimes there's edits to just nature scenes, which the characters are within. And I encourage that because it starts to train your gaze in a different way. That it's slow, it's attentive, it's, I would say it teeters on sacramental, at least with someone like Malick, who is a Christian, that is going into his films to some degree. Um, so I think that's a really great way to reorder your attention. I knew a guy too that experienced this kind of with going back and watching Akira Kurosawa films. So I think that's another really good too. He's very meditative in what he does, his structure. Sometimes old movies in a general sense can kind of do that for you. But yeah, so I think some of it's the fasting, and then kind of pay attention to how the media is working, what it's doing to people. I think when you fuse those together, you can kind of combat what what I call the pornographic gaze, because I think that captures all those elements that I just discussed in one go.
Mm. So are you kind of saying that the pornographic gaze, beyond just um, using sex to sell, it's like hijacking, let's say, our dopamine or something within
Yeah,
our biology to like get our attention. And so
yeah,
a means to,
absolutely.
okay, so a means to combat that is to essentially consume more media that does that less or does the opposite of that, which is
Yes.
to kind of linger on more meditative stuff. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I'll
Yeah.
give a good anecdote that this was really interesting in grad school that started me thinking this way. I mean, I was already very anti-pornography at this point in my time, but I had a teacher who had worked with some documentary filmmakers before, and one of them had previously, what they were working on at this point was filming a Japanese wrestling league, both men and women at this time, I believe. But they had a history of being a pornography director. And he thought this was really weird that they made this sudden pivot. In his eyes, a sudden pivot. He started talking with the director and it was like, how did you, like, what are you doing going from like pornography to this? And the director outlined, well, I'm ultimately doing the same thing. I'm just trying to up spectacle more and more and more and more. These people are essentially like bodies that I can cast onto whatever. And I'm just then trying to present them in a very spectacular, over the top novelty way that amuses people, that
Mm,
hits that dopamine response that you're talking about. But as we know, that becomes a cycle, as the director knows. So they have to keep upping it more, and more, more crazy, more novel, more spectacular, you know?
mm. You know, my example of that, my anecdotal example of that is the movies The Hangover. Because like,
Okay. Yeah. It makes sense.
the
It
first one
does.
was fine, it was funny. And I just remember the second one, like they got to up the ante, right? They always got to up the ante and
Uh-huh.
up the spectacle, and then it just started getting like just to the point where it's shocking, like shock and awe,
Yeah.
disgusting.
Yeah.
It's just like, okay, now it's not funny anymore. It's just disgusting. um, okay, cool. So last subject because it's been an hour and 15 minutes, and I respect your time.
Yeah.
So, uh, but the last point I wanted to talk about is this idea of predictive media and the false
Hmm.
prophecy, or in some ways you could say the self-fulfilled prophecy. Um,
Yes. Yeah.
let's talk about how media is used to influence, to
Hmm.
guide, let's say, people at
Yeah.
large and
Yeah.
populations down particular directions.
Yeah, so same with the pornographic gaze and this one. These are two video ideas I'm cooking up, so if people are interested in this, stay tuned and keep your eyes on me. Hopefully there will be more in-depth videos on this where I'll have proper terminology and studies that kind of back up this, especially with this one, because I've been kind of interested in it, which I feel like over the last 6 years, we're seeing more and more online in particular media and media personalities who want to sort of posit themselves as like speaking into this sort of prophetic authority over something, a prediction, a warning, I'm sort of bucking it in two different ways. I think in an online social media space, we see this a lot with like talking about other people. It's like this person is about to do, because they share these ideas, because they take this stance on this thing, then I claim that like this thing is going to happen to them, or they're going to say this next, and then it'll have this repercussion, so on and so forth. And then there's the actual like I'm going to predict an event. Saw it with the last election cycle. Who's going to win? You have people that are trying to forecast that, and little things that fit into each place sort of feeds that narrative for them. I think right now you see it a lot with AI. Is there a bubble? Is there not a bubble? Anything that kind of moves in this way points to like all these companies are going to crash and burn. Is not a lot of fun, or it they're going to take over the world, and isn't that a lot of fun? So depending on how they're presenting those things, little events sort of feed into it. um and then of course I think you saw this a lot with the war in Iran recently, where it's like, what is this going to become? You got a lot of people doing the same thing.
Even
And
that
what's
website, I forget what it's called, where you can basically make bets. as to the
Yeah,
outcomes of everything.
polymarket, which
Polymarket,
is a
yeah.
huge thing. Polymarket is a huge thing where essentially now they can also monetize you feeding into someone's predictions on this thing, and there's only one person winning when you do that. But it's interesting because when I've tinkered with this idea, I was like, what is there's just something like addictive about it. So clearly there's like a dopamine response. But a lot of the false prophecy stuff that I'm pointing out here, and I'm just kind of using that in a tongue-in-cheek way, but really it's better to say like a predictive media. Um, it's usually like terrible things happening, or it's like something bad's going to happen to this person. This person's spiraling because they're a bad person, or there's going to be a famine or something, right? But it activates, even what's interesting I've learned with this is that your dopamine response is very much anticipatory. So it activates the same system, even if it's not something gratifying. There is a sort of gratification in the idea that you aligned yourself with this personality and they're right about something. Same thing if they're wrong about it, you're still activating the system that is anticipating this. So I mean, the classic example is the cable news outrage cycle. That for some reason, just because everything's more decentralized, people think we're past that. But I'm seeing it seep in again and again, more and more with even decentralized groups of whether it's a media group online or even a single personality. And I think ultimately, again, if you do a media fast, you'll start noticing this. And you kind of have to start asking yourself this, as I've had to do with myself. It's like, hey, it's one thing to watch someone who's an expert in a field trying to outline predictions and think about what might happen in the future with XYZ. It's a different thing when you pay attention to how they're messaging that. Are they trying to evoke anxiety? Are they trying to evoke fear? If that's the case, they're clearly trying to kind of keep people in a certain cycle, and they're going to profit off that. And again, that gets all the way back at the beginning. Some of these people are just doing it because it's what the news cycle's been doing for decades at this point. It's like it's the mode that they know how to message to. But I feel like if we're discerning with it, we can pay attention to that messaging and start thinking, okay, if I'm getting trapped in this like cycle of watching this predictive stuff, maybe it's just better if I back away from it and kind of keep my ear loosely to the ground, paying attention to these events. Because I'll let you know right now, you don't have to know day in and day out which little news of the day is going to slot into this prediction that they can try to spin to show that like they're right about something, right?
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's still something I'm cooking on, but it's been really interesting seeing that.
Yeah, look forward to that. And I'll add as a closing note, on top of the media fast, Christ as the way, the truth, and the life. The closer you
Yes.
come
Yeah.
to the truth of Christ, the more you have the discernment to be able to see what's
Absolutely,
going
yeah.
on in the media you consume. Because without that relationship, without Christ, without that closeness, even if you fast from media, you don't have that noose, right, that we talked about, that's developed,
Yes.
so that you're
Yeah.
able
Yeah.
to see that. So, but before you go on your media fast, check out Seth's YouTube channel down below. It's been such a pleasure talking to you. You're very well spoken, and I love how you portray ideas. So it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to the videos that you're drumming up and dishing out.
Thank you so much, Matthew. Yeah, this has been a lot of fun, and I've really just enjoyed my time. And thank you for having me on.
For sure, you're welcome back anytime. Thanks everyone for watching, and God willing, we'll see you in the next video. Godspeed.